Hello, I'm Jack Perkins. Welcome to Biography. As a teenager, he had a squeaky voice, a scrawny body, and ears that stuck out like jug handles. You know what happened on his first performance on stage? He tripped and fell on his face. Now, that's not an auspicious beginning for a king, but a king Clark Gable was. On top of the heap for over 30 years, this was the leading man that men and women liked equally. Whether he was roping wild horses with Marilyn Monroe, hitchhiking with Claudette Colbert, or telling Scarlett that he didn't give a damn. To Gable himself, all this king business was a lot of bunk. He said, "I'm just a lucky slob from Ohio." Well, his good fortune was ours. Join us as Biography presents a look at the life of the king, Clark Gable.
We'll miss you terribly.
Yeah, don't kid the troop. Goodbye, honey.
Remember, you promised to write.
Sure, every day. Hey, goodbye, beautiful.
Goodbye, Harry. What's the new address?
Care NBA, National Potable Artist. They'll know where I am. Goodbye. Hey, you've been swell to me.
Oh, you've been wonderful to us, Harry.
Yeah, sure. Goodbye.
Don't forget, Harry. One of these days, we're going to see his name up in electric lights. Biggest star on Broadway.
Clark Gable? Well, he was the best, as you know. There was only one Clark Gable. And there's only one Clark Gable right to now, as far as I'm concerned.
That his popularity throughout the world is because they believe him, and they believe what he is, and when he says something, they believe him.
He was a lovely man, and I just think how fate plays a bad trick. He never had children except after he died, his wife had his son, John Gable, who's now 29 years old.
I grew up without my father. My father, Clark Gable, he passed away a few months before I was born. Scrapbooks here, my father, different pictures he made, some of the movies, some of the memorabilia. You can see a picture of him here when he was a young kid.
When I began writing books in the mid-1970s, Clark Gable was a natural subject for me to select because of my great interest in him. I was born in Piney Fork, Ohio, which was only 3 miles from Hopedale, Ohio, where Clark Gable lived from the time he was 8 until he was 15. So I was always fascinated with that fact, and in fact our family often talked to our neighbors about the fact that we came from a little mining town where Clark Gable lived as a youngster. So for years I always had an interest in Clark Gable, little realizing that many years later I would be writing a book about him. Gable first got married at the age of 23, to Josephine Dillon, who was his acting coach. She was 14 years older than him, but played an important part in getting him started in films. She helped change his image, helped work on his voice, helped him fix his teeth, and really got him started in the film business. Clark Gable did not become a star overnight. He worked hard at his craft, starting as a stage actor. It took him nearly 12 years before he achieved stardom. He was about 30 years old at the time.
Came across the United States and went to Los Angeles with a play called The Last Mile. And it was a big success, so they decided to test him. And they said, no, his ears stuck out too much. And he used to put a piece of wax here and stick it like that so it would hold it. Every once in a while it'd go, it would pop out. But he told me they offered him a movie contract. So he had a contract to go back to New York to be in a play. And the producer was a man named Al Woods. So he called Al Woods and he said, Mr. Woods, I've been asked to be in the movies and they've offered me a contract. I have a contract with you. And Al Woods said to him, how much are they going to pay you? He said, $700 a week. He said, stay out there. So Clark Gable stayed out there and never came back to the stage again.
Who's this Holbrook you're talking about?
You never heard of him, I...
Miss, I'm from Montana. And I'm headed New Mexico way. What was your name in Montana? Brett. Same as here. I'm headed New Mexico way.
The first time I discovered this power of being yourself was it happened one night with Clark Gable. Clark Gable was an actor and had acted in many parts, but he was never as good as he was in that picture, because he played not as an actor, he was himself. He played himself in that picture. And it's the only picture that man ever was allowed to play in which he played himself. This lucky guy, this wonderful man with great charisma. You liked him very much. That is Clark Gable in real life. And you got the man living his own life exactly as he lived at home.
Had a charisma that was unparalleled in Hollywood. He was the biggest star at a time when Hollywood was loaded with stars. It was the golden age of Hollywood, the 30s.
And I think that some actors have always been concerned that what they do on the screen should be exactly the way the public perceives them. And I think with Gable particularly, that he knew that he was good for a certain kind of role, and he was that raffish character somehow, not quite above the salt, but he was a man of the outdoors and a little uncomfortable indoors, perhaps, and not a man who always knew which fork to use, I would say, at the table.
It's me, Toots. I've been waiting for you to come off watch.
Get out of here.
Look, I got a mighty good reason for being here.
You've always got a good reason for anything you do. In fact, I don't know anybody who can think of any more remarkable good reasons than you can on short notice.
Listen to me, Toots. I took an awful chance coming here. I might have got heaved overboard.
Don't run any more risk by staying. Get off on the rest of your
Toots,
round.
you've got to listen to me. I only came here for one thing.
I'm quite aware of that. You're always waiting for a sailor to comfort him. There's only a woman like you can comfort a man who's too tired or too drunk to care who it is.
Oh, Toots, don't be like that. If you keep that up, you're going to talk yourself right out.
I hope so.
Gable in the film wore a pigtail. A hairdresser had a small extension of hair that fit down over his collar. very handsome fellow and in great physical shape.
Yes, I think I've got to know my father pretty well from seeing quite a few of his movies. There's a few in particular that I really like. Mutiny on the Bounty, there's a few scenes out of that where he's just takes over the ship, you know, ties up Captain Bligh, and I like that part of it. It's always been one of my favorites.
He really had that marvelous magic for the screen, which only the big ones get. There's some kind of, I don't know what it is, chemistry that goes on between the really big names, the big stars who really draw the people, attract the people. There's some chemistry that goes on.
What I look for when I watch my father's movies is the way he uses his voice, some of the facial expressions, his strong, vivacious attitude that he always has. He never backs down to anything. I really like that in an actor.
Now, acting is an old profession. Probably the oldest profession that we have, really. But acting is not what we want in motion pictures. Acting is make-believe. You are making believe that you are something. You are something else. What becomes a great actor is the actor who does not perform, but who lives the part.
Clark Gable's image was quite important to him. So the studio and he himself did everything possible to project an image of a man who was active in sports, hunting, fishing, golf, and so forth. He was very careful to choose roles that would best project his image. And I think this had a lot to do with the fact that women loved him and men idolized him.
He apparently fought very hard against doing Gone with the Wind because he just wasn't sure that it was his cup of tea.
People form opinions about characters, and they formed the opinion that I was the one to play it. They already had a preconceived idea of what they were going to see. Now, that's why I didn't want to play it. I said, too many people know this character. But my God, with Red Butler, if they saw one thing that they didn't like, they would have remembered back to the book. I had to be on my toes, and I do that.
Days in Dixie. Southern hospitality is at a fever pitch.
No wonder.
Yes, it's the Clark Gables, just in from the coast. Charming Carol Lombard and friend husband get a mighty welcome. After dark, all Atlanta turned out for the big parade that starts 3 exciting days of celebration.
Acclaim from start to finish was, is, and always Red Butler, who now owns Atlanta, Mr. Clark Gable.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You know, as I started down here this evening, your mayor told me that the population of Atlanta was 300,000. I have seen myself tonight coming from the airport 3 million people.
After he divorced Josephine Dillon, he married Rhea Langham, a socialite who was also older than him, about 17 years older than him. And she helped him also with his image and introduced him to the right people, and did a lot to further his career. Gable's marriage to Rhea Langham ended in divorce in 1939 when he was working on Gone with the Wind, and he immediately married Carol Lombard, and they quickly bought the ranch in Encino. And he actually worked on the farm with Carol Lombard, his wife at the time, and he really enjoyed his life there because it brought back memories of his childhood when he was more or less a farm boy.
He lived on that 20-acre ranch. It was all orange trees when he moved there. There wasn't a house or a city really nearby. And Encino was just a small town just filled with orange groves. And I kind of liked that growing up in that location out there. It was real nice and secluded, and we had a lot in common in that way. I do have quite a few animals and a couple of motorcycles and a truck or two, and I have a good time here. It's real relaxing. It's away from the city. I can just go to the beach and pretty much carry about my own business out here without running into a bunch of people or having to worry about traffic jams. I love it here. Wouldn't have it any other way. Enjoyed the outdoors. They hunted ducks quite a bit, went on fishing trips, and just lived life at the ranch together with each other. And, used to sit out on the back porch and read books and watch the sunset. It was a real nice place. I don't really know that much about Carol Lombard. My mother really never told me too many stories about them, but I know that they had a really good relationship together.
He had in his contract at 6 o'clock, I think it was 6, maybe 5 o'clock, he went home. He had the right to walk.
And he filled a different kind of a niche in Hollywood. He was sort of the raffish guy that you'd be a little nervous if he was courting your daughter, I think. And there was an element of danger in him that did not exist in Jimmy Stewart, for example, or certainly even in Gary Cooper. You just never knew about Gable. And I think it was part of his excitement. Obviously, his masculine good looks were also part of it.
I was little, I threw some lemonade on the screen because I saw my father kissing another woman.
Their days on the ranch actually consisted of only 3 years because in 1942, Carol Lombard was killed in a plane crash returning from a bond-raising tour, which she was doing for the U.S. government. She was killed in a plane crash in Las Vegas. This was a terrible blow to Clark Gable. She was the love of his life.
I race the Nevada 500. It's put on by HDRA and SCORE, and there's a big desert race they put on there every year. But we race around the mountain where she was killed. A friend of mine pointed it out to me and said that's where the plane went down with Carol Lombard. And I never knew that until probably about 5 years ago. That was a real bad tragedy. You know, really disheartened my dad quite a bit because he really never got a chance to, you know, say goodbye to her or anything, and just losing your wife in a plane crash like that would be, I think, real horrendous. Was a B-52 pilot in World War II. Got the heel of his boot shot off, and he was flying, doing some reconnaissance flights into Germany at the time. And he made it all the way back, you know, being shot down and all.
Here's where our real job begins. We're in the Graduate School of Gunnery now, learning it in combat, trying to put it on the film, trying to report it in a way that will help the gunners back home to know what to expect when they go out on their first mission.
And then he married Lady Ashley, a socialite from England. And that was a very short-lived marriage that only lasted 17 months. And in some ways, she looked like Carole Lombard, but she was not the same type of personality, and her personalities clash.
Yeah, there's, this is the 1953 Africa scrapbook that I have of Magambo, the movie he did with Grace Kelly and Ava Gardner. And there's a few interesting pictures in here of him talking to the natives when he's off the set, and some other pictures of him getting a haircut. But one of my favorite pictures in here is the story of the snake. I guess they were all sitting around eating lunch one day, and this big, huge, I believe it was a reticulated python, came slithering up to the lunch site. And good thing my dad was there. Everybody was screaming and yelling, and he took care of the snake, and they skinned it, and I still have the skin to this day. It's a pretty interesting story.
Married Kay Gable, who was in many ways more like Carole Lombard in that she did like hunting and fishing and the simple things in life. And she had 2 children that Clark loved, and he used to go to their Halloween parties, and he treated them as if they were his own children. They purchased a second home at Bermuda Dunes in Palm Springs, where they would mostly spend the winters playing golf and moving social circles there.
day I started in publicity, Burt Lancaster fired the head of publicity. He said, "You take his position until we find a new head." Well, we were then publicizing Run Silent, Run Deep, Marty, Trapeze, so all of that publicity fell right in my lap. So what I did, I wrote a script for Gable and Burt Lancaster to tour the Navy base in San Diego. I had made arrangements for Burt and Clark to go out on this submarine. Anyway, I gave a girl $10 a wave. They were lined up on either side of the float. And I gave her $10 to faint and fall over into the water. $10 in those days was a little bit of money. Anyway, as Gable walked down the float, I expected the girl to faint and fall backwards, but she never did. Her mouth just dropped open, and she looked at Gable, and I lost my $10.
The first time I went in to shoot a close-up, real close shot, I noticed he had a little tremor in his head, just the slightest tremor. So I went up to him. I said, "Clark, I've got something to tell you. I'm noticing now that I'm getting a close-up that you have a little tremor." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He said, "Okay, fine. Go ahead." So I went back, started to take, and he could hold it for a decent-sized take. He could control it for the length I needed on any close-up. And then he would relax and it would come again. So I always admired that in him. He was out of energy by late in the afternoon, so it was in his contract that he had to be finished by 5 o'clock. I had been spending all afternoon with the crew, a very tricky shot with water rushing down in outside the thing, and they set on a gimbal. It was very tricky, and I spent all afternoon getting it lined up, and it was approaching 5 o'clock. It was just about getting ready to shoot. And I needed desperately to get it done that day because I knew if I didn't, I had to start all over the next morning and line it up. It'd take me the whole morning to get it set. I wanted so much to do this. I went to two fellows who were Clark's aide-de-camps. One of them was the masseur who used to rub him down. And I said, "Fellas, is there any way you could get Clark to give me 10 minutes at least to get this shot so I don't have to lose a half a day tomorrow morning? And if he could do it, I could get it by 10 after 5. So they went to him. And he agreed. This is the mark of the pro and the gentleman, you know. He agreed to do it. Just give me till 10 after 5, and they lined the whole thing up and started, and we got the shot. We got it in the can. The guy said to me later, these two fellows said, "I don't know how you know what it is. That's the only time, we've been doing this for many years, the only time we've ever seen him go past 5 o'clock. But that was the mark of the kind of professional he was.
Now, when I watch my father's pictures, since I've done a movie already, I see it in a lot different perspective. I realize how good he really was. Because when I was on my first movie, it's hard work. People might think it's easy money and everything, but that's not so. There's a lot of stress, a lot of repetition. You got to know exactly where you left the scene before. You have to realize what character you were in and put yourself back in that character. But I think it's going to help me a lot just looking at his films now, you know, and realizing what a good actor he really was. Because before I didn't realize it, because I'd never done a film until a couple years ago. And now I see.
Yes, I first knew Clark Gable back in 1958. I'd read a story about an Italian fisherman on Capri who had a little boy. And it was a funny story, a touching story, except there was one thing wrong with it. We wanted to do it for Sophia. So it was simple. We changed the whole story around, and instead of an Italian fisherman, it was an Italian girl who sang in a nightclub and had to take care of a little boy who was her nephew. So we wrote the story and we gave it to Sophia. We figured after our big success, we had no problem. But Sophia and Carlo Ponti, her husband, decided they didn't want to do it. And my agent at the time represented Clark Gable. So I said, why don't you try, see if Clark would be interested in playing the American, because when you're trying to get a picture going and you have two stars of almost equal magnitude, what you do is you write two different stories. And you submit the story where the man is important to the man and the story where the woman is important to the woman. Well, we tried with Sophia and we struck out, so we reorganized the story so you realize that this is the story of an American man who finally learns how to be an Italian. And we submitted to Clark, and he agreed to do it. And so then we went back to Sophia, and she was very impressed, and she says, well, if Gable will do it, she says, I'll do it. And we were shooting the big courtroom scene with Sophia. Vittorio De Sica was her lawyer, and Clark Gable, and the fight was over Mariotto, the little boy. And I shot one day. I come back the second day, and my assistant said, the chief judge, because there are 4 judges on the bench, isn't here. I said, why not? He says, oh, he told me to tell you he got a better job. So I said, what am I supposed to do? I've got to go shoot all the close shots and everything else. He says, well, don't worry. He sent his brother to take his place. So I said, that's great. Gee, I wonder if Gable has a brother who'll work after 5. We never found him. But I did find the actor later. I said, what was the idea of walking out? He says, well, look. He says, in that scene, you've got Clark, you've got Sophia, you've got Vittorio De Sica. He says, if anybody notices it's my brother and not me, you've got a pretty lousy story.
Almost kind of an honor sitting next to you. You just shine in my eyes. That's my true feeling, Rod. What makes you so sad? I think you're the saddest girl I ever met.
This man never said that. I'm usually told how happy I am.
He was the most normal person on the set. And that made him stand out, apart from the fact that I was impressed that it was Clark Gable, and that even though he was aging, he still had such a kind of masculine, secure, somebody you kind of want as a father figure. And of course, you know, Marilyn Monroe, who was doing the film with him, I think felt that way about him, half intimidated, half thrilled to be doing it. But he, if you think that Montgomery Clift was on that film with problems, Marilyn was on that film with problems, John Huston was, as I remember, riding across the desert on a camel and making bets of who was going to get there first. And Gable stayed the consummate professional.
Then Gable, before we started shooting, had sent a man to me who said, Mr. Gable would like to rehearse the lines with you. I said, okay. Where do I meet him? He said, no, you do it with me. I said, what? He said, yeah, we'll just go over the lines. So I went over the lines with this man. He went back to tell Gable how I was doing, what kind of actor.
Gable also got trapped into a kind of macho image. And in those early films, when he was doing comedy, he was playing character, and I think that the thing that he loved about the part in The Misfits was that it was a real acting part. It wasn't the image of Gable, the leading man. It really was a wonderful part for him, where he, again, could be what all himself, but more than himself. And I think he was wonderful in the film because of that also.
Where are they? Where who? My kids. I told them I'd be back in a minute. You heard me tell them. They went outside. Outside.
Gaylord! Gaylord! Rosemary! Gaylord! 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 Here's your father! Gaylord! I know you hear me! Where you gone to? I told you to be right back! You come here now!
Don't worry, mister. You'll probably find him at home.
Gaylord! You come here now! I know you hear me! Happy! I know you hear me! You come here now!
And I think he tried too hard to be the macho man in that, and maybe John Huston worked him too hard or made him do things that he really shouldn't have done at his age. But he didn't want to admit age or anything else, and as a consequence, The Misfits was his last film.
He knew all his lines. He was always on time. He was the true professional actor. He had come out of the studio system from years ago, where you were under contract and you did the movie you were told to do. You were a contracted employee of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. So Gable was always exactly interested in what was going on around him and understood about Marilyn's problems and liked her very much. She adored him.
The other thing that impressed me about him is that I would sit on the set, and a lot of the time they were waiting for Marilyn, who was having tremendous physical problems. She had been hospitalized already and then gone back to work. And I remember having this long conversation with Gable in which he was very understanding. He said, you know, this business in some ways is harder on women than it is on men. He said, you know, that poor girl, you know, he seemed to really have a lot of compassion for her. And as a matter of fact, I think that as I remember in that movie, he also had, I think he had script approval, something, because I remember that they came back to Marilyn and Arthur Miller had broken up, and Arthur rewrote some scenes, and I think rewrote them to put Marilyn's character in a possibly less flattering light, whatever. Not good things. And Gable said he would read the new lines, and he read them, and he said, gentlemen, I've finished the picture, and he tossed the pages, and he left. I thought it was very classy, you know.
How do you find your way back in the dark?
Just head for that big star straight on. The highway's under it. It'll take us right home.
We finished the movie at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in Hollywood, in Culver City, and that was on a Friday. On Saturday, I got on a plane to fly home, and while I was on the plane, they announced that Clark Gable had a heart attack. And my heart, I was shaking because I just left him. And I landed. He was in the hospital. He was getting better. President Eisenhower called him and said, I wish you well. I've had a heart attack. You'll be all right. And then 10 days later, he was gone.
The Misfits, in a way, is a perfect legacy for him, I guess, because it was Gable the man of action, Gable the man of strong and not necessarily subtle feelings, the man of the outdoors, and so on and so forth. So I think that The Misfits and Gone with the Wind are two wonderful pieces to remember Gable by.
When I read stuff about my father, it really intrigues me a lot. It gives me a lot of inspiration on different ways I could go with my acting and everything. But like I said earlier, I'm my own self, and my father was him. There will never be another Clark Gable.
Since the mid-50s, I guess, and early 60s, when TV started to have its impact on the box office, and the studios cut back and don't have stars under contract now as they did. There are individual pictures made, so there's no continuity in terms of building that image and keeping that image up there of the major stars that they could count on.
I mean, maybe it's a symbol of the changing times that you had actors who really felt that they should do for the preservation of their careers the same thing over and over again, and there are actors now who feel it's a kind of death to repeat themselves and try to do something different each time. I think it really is one of the measures of the way the movies have changed over the last half century. I think so many of our actors now are down to life size, and I think that Gable was bigger than life, and that's a quality that we've lost, unfortunately.
He had everything that a man should have to be a big star, and believe me, he was.
He has integrity in his face. He has integrity in his whole attitude. He is probably one of the most popular actors in the world, just because he is believable.
And now, movies are coming into an age where everything seems to be sex and violence and blood and a few more things like that. And when boy meets girl, it's an accident. It's boy meets boy and girl meets girl, or whatever combination you want to think of. But I like to think that the public is going to get back to the kind of films that Clark Gable liked to make and Frank Capra liked to make and I like to make, and that maybe we can find the public again, because I think that's where Clark was headed toward the end of his career. So why don't we make Gone with the Wind again? Is anybody willing?
Even though Gable was famous for quitting work every day at 5 and going home to his ranch, he never planned to retire. He said he wanted to keep working until he died. But he also hoped he wouldn't be around long enough to bore people. Well, both wishes came true. But thanks to his legacy of film, Gable the King continues to reign.